Okay. Are we ready to go? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Josette Sheeran, and I'm really pleased to be with you here today. Our topic for this next 45 minutes is Seeds of Tomorrow, Investing in Food Security. This year, the Future Investment Initiative theme is Challenges of Our Time, Why We Must Invest in Humanity. Humanity, of course, is not something out there. It's all of us. And I think we were all humbled during this COVID pandemic, understanding these challenges know no borders, no religious or racial borders, and no income boundaries. We're all in it together, never more so than with food. We all need to eat. All of our children need nutritious food, particularly from the time of conception through 2 years old and through their lives. A year ago, the organization that I led, the World Food Program, was awarded the Nobel Prize, recognizing the importance of food to the future of humanity, but also as a call to action. And we know that with COVID, we have 270 million people in the world today marching toward starvation. So I'm going to involve the audience for a moment here, and I'd ask each of you to take a moment of reflection. Hunger is a nearly universal experience. And I would just like if you would raise your hand if you have ever in your life experienced the phenomenon of not having enough to eat. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's shared throughout history. Now think of your parents. Do you remember ever hearing a story of them not having enough to eat? And now think of your grandparents.
Oh, sure.
And raise your hands if you've ever heard a story in those 3 generations. Sure. It's pretty universal. And during the 2008 food crisis, where the price of food doubled overnight, we learned that people have only a few solutions if they're facing starvation. They can revolt, they can migrate, or they can die. I think we need a plan B, and that's what this panel is about. The crazy thing is there's enough kilocalories to feed every person in the world, 2,100 a day calories. And I use crazy because this is the most solvable problem in the world today. And so today we have 4 solution revolutionaries here on the panel, all tackling a different piece of this. I think you'll leave as inspired as I've been looking at their backgrounds and what they're doing in the world. And we'll talk about not only the crisis in supply, but the crisis in access and affordability of food, and how we can change the game. One rule of our panel is we don't want to focus on the problem, we want to move it ahead, move beyond it, and that's why I did the broad view of the challenge we have. We're going to begin with His Royal Highness Prince Khaled bin Alwaleed bin Talal Al Saud. He is the founder and CEO of KBW Ventures. He's a pioneering global venture capitalist with a long focus on food, technology, and agri-tech. He's invested in transformational solutions in protein production and how we will feed the world. We're so pleased to have you, Prince Khaled, and I'd love to hear about why you're focused on protein and how you make your decisions on where to direct your investment.
Sure. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu ala rasulillah. Thank you very much for having me. Please call me Khaled. One of the most important things that I noticed prior to investing in the plant-based protein as well as the cellular agriculture industry was the sheer amount of crops that were being produced to feed 70 billion animals, while we still cry about 800 million, 1 billion people starving. It just makes no sense. So that was one of the things why, one of the reasons at least, why I thought that investing in the cellular agriculture space needs to happen as soon as possible, because we need to transform this industry. It's an unsustainable industry, it's vastly inefficient, and even the companies who are into these type of industries know this, and we see this from their investments in the cell ag space. JBL, we've seen Tyson Foods and others. So it's evident that they know that there's a vast inefficiency for producing protein, so to speak, to feed people, while feeding this type of protein or feeding the animals so much food that it's literally going to waste. So that was one of the reasons why I really wanted to focus on this industry and really shed light on the fact that this is a transformational industry. And the meat industry is only growing. It's about an $800 to $900 billion industry. It'll only grow to about $2 trillion by 2050. That cannot sustain in the way we're producing protein now. And that was the reasons why I created KBW Ventures to invest in these sustainable industries.
You're also on the advisory board for the X Prize,
Yes.
looking at a prize in food solutions over the next 2 years. Can you give us a sneak preview? Are you seeing a lot of exciting ideas come through?
I can't give too much details, obviously, but it's super exciting to see these early stage companies and pretty advanced stage companies producing the technology that they're doing for this innovative industry. And I can't really say much about it right now, but the future is definitely bright to see all these amazing entrepreneurs doing the stuff that they're doing right now for the environment and for humanity.
Sounds like hope is in the making here. I'm next going to turn to Sky Kurtz. He's the co-founder and CEO of Pure Harvest Smart Farms. Forbes has named your company the most funded startup in the Middle East. I hear you have news as of yesterday, but you've been able to raise $250 million. You have fresh produce hybrid solutions. Why are your solutions attracting the kind of capital that can take them to scale, and what is your unique contribution to this challenge?
Well, I believe the reason we're attracting the capital at scale is we've developed what we call veridical farming. It's a solution that is quite economic and scalable and sustainable. And why it's called a hybrid is we're sort of like a high-tech greenhouse and a vertical farm had a baby. And we sometimes behave like a vertical farm. We close the system and we circulate the climate internally, et cetera. Other times we open it and we exchange air with the outside world, and we're behaving in both ways. But the reason we do this is that we find that it is the most economic and resource efficient way to grow food, particularly in harsh climate environments. I think what's really unique about us is that we sort of focus on farming within 3,000 miles of the equator. And the reason why is we built our solution around embracing natural light, sunlight. We view ourselves as an energy company. We convert sun energy to calories as cheaply as possible, and everything we're doing is an energy conversion mechanism. And I think you had asked an interesting question in our earlier discussion of what would you want people to know about you? And I think why we believe we're unique and what I believe this industry has the potential to do is to decouple food production from climate and instead marry it to energy and capital sources. And these are things that are abundant, and there are solutions driving greater efficiency and energy. We're able to marry those trends and those solutions, the adoption of those technologies into our solution, making food more affordable and making it possible to grow sustainably, clean, high-quality, fresh produce anywhere, even in the harshest environments in the world. And we're battle-tested right here in one of the harshest environments. We started in the UAE. We're producing strawberries and leafy greens and tomatoes. We're now nearly done with our first farm here in Saudi, breaking ground in Kuwait, and now expanding into Asia. And then finishing on that, the news that we were breaking, we closed another $65 million capital raise, takes us to about $272 million. And that capital, though, is to help us expand our solution to Asia, markets like Singapore, Philippines, Malaysia, and Korea.
You know, it strikes me, Sky, you and I share roots in Arizona. You're from a little tiny town I've been to, Jerome, Arizona, which is surrounded by dry lands.
Yes.
Very similar landscape. What brought you from there to do and pioneer your work in the Middle East?
Well, it's a long, I'd be honest, education brought me from there. I was a strong student. I got a scholarship, and then from there it took me on a journey that went from Wall Street to Silicon Valley to farming. And what's funny, though, in that little town of Jerome you mentioned, my family owned a restaurant. I was surrounded by food growing up. I worked in there from the time I was 8 years old. And then, and that really gave me a passion for food. But the other thing is my town was a mining town, as you know, with slag piles and waste everywhere. I'm a big believer that they say waste begins where imagination ends. And I thought that was an early kind of, calling. I wanted to find my way towards something that would eliminate that waste and all of the problems it caused environmentally, the way it affected people's lives. And so this was a calling I felt in when I found farming and the ability to marry my passion for tech, knowledge of capital markets, and the ability to apply that into something good that actually helps humanity. So I think that's what pulled me out of the desert into another desert where I live now. I'm based out of the UAE.
And we both owe thanks to Arizona State University, voted 6 years in a row the most innovative in the world.
Thank you.
Philippe, I'm going to turn to you. Philippe Rombaut, he's the co-owner and CEO of Agropolychim. So Philippe, you've taken a Bulgarian state-owned fertilizer company that was in liquidation. You've turned it around into the leading and most profitable fertilizer company in the Balkans, and you also sell globally from the US to Bangladesh and beyond. You've just started a grain terminal in the Black Sea. You have a 5,000-acre farm in Europe's most inefficient Europe's most inefficient ag productivity region, and you're breaking new productivity records.
Yeah.
Tell us what we need to know about your part of the revolution.
I think it's a lot of luck and hard work. The beginning, when we took over the company, the first 5 years, what you do is just restructure and make it happen. And after 5 years, we realized actually what is the farmer doing with all these products? And I realized that actually the productivity levels of the farm in Bulgaria was extremely low, actually the same as in 1990 when basically the communists left. And that has all kinds of reasons, but that actually led me to say, okay, let's start showing how it should be done, because I was convinced, being sitting on the most fertile lands, actually, of one of the most fertile lands in Europe, starting in Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, Hungary also, Serbia, it's impossible that we are at half the tonnage per hectare as in France. In France, as far as wheat is concerned, average they're churning out 8 tons per hectare, whereas in that region it's 4 tons per hectare. So even then we started farming, and I remember that I asked for subsidies to buy some tractors with some tractors, and we had to make a business plan. And the business plan was was based on going from 4 tons to 6 tons. It was refused because the Bulgarians were saying it's not possible. It's not possible. Well, guess what? 3 years ago actually, we were at 9.2 tons. 9.2 tons, above the best harvest in France. And the reason why we actually even went to this area, Vidin area, which is northwest of Bulgaria, is because we took it also as a marketing tool for showing our clients that it can be done. Because if we had taken a farm, for instance, close to the factory in the Dobruja area, in Varna area, people would say, oh, it's normal, it's Varna. But then when you say you make this in Vidin area, which is officially the poorest region in Europe, and you say there you beat the records of the whole of Bulgaria and of France, then the people start paying attention. And then from then onwards, really, it's a matter of, there's a whole toolbox of things that can be used by the farmers right now. And we're talking about innovations, but there's lots of innovations which came out and tools which came out the last 10 years. It's a matter of using them. And I had an approach like an industrialist, like a factory guy. I mean, process controls, get it all right, do the things on time, spread when you have to spread, and have all the IoTs which you can do, and we get the results. And so my conviction is that Bulgaria right now, last year, in spite of the COVID, and Romania, and Ukraine, actually had a record harvest. In Bulgaria and Romania for sure, because there's a lot of education that has happened, not only because of us, but also from the European Union subsidies which were given, and the farmers got a lot more intelligence. And so my thesis is that, and my conviction is that, whereas 20 years ago it was 4 tons per hectare, and last year in Bulgaria was 5.7, but I'm at 7 and 8. I'm convinced that the Bulgarian farmers and the Romanian farmers and the Ukrainian farmers can easily increase by 1 or even 2 tons per hectare. It's a lot, because it means that in Bulgaria and Romania alone, if we're going to achieve this, and when we're going to achieve this, not if, when we're going to achieve this, this means 6 million tons of hectare, or 6 million tons of wheat, which we'll be able to export. 6 million tons of wheat. This means that if you take any normal farm somewhere in Africa or wherever, where you can get a 4 ton or maybe 4.5 tons, this means that we will avoid over 1.5 million tons of forest to be cut down, just because we increased the efficiencies of land which exists, which just needs to be toiled as it should with all the necessary techniques that we have. The bad news that I have, though, is that, and don't shoot me after that, is that the food crisis of 2008 is right in front of our door right now. And it has all to do with fertilizers. We are large fertilizer producers, and I think we know what we're doing and what is going to happen now. Because of the energy crisis which is hitting Europe, we are facing 3 times gas prices, electricity prices have gone up, even China now. Let's say 30 to 40% of the fertilizer factories are down. My factory is working full blast. But this means that the farmers, first of all, have to pay 3 times the price for their fertilizers right now. Electricity price is high, and they can't get them. This means that there will be a reduction of fertilizer in the fields by at least 25% this year in Europe. And if you know that there is Europe is normally producing about 153 million tons of grain, there will be a reduction by let's say 20% even. That's 30 million down. Europe only exports 25 million.
Well, Philippe, you make a really good point. And in 2008, the connection between the price of energy, the inputs, and the price of food soaring was so direct, and it was the first time we really saw that spread throughout the world like wildfire. I called it a silent tsunami, and that really took on the world, so we have to watch these factors. David Rosenberg is the co-founder and CEO of AeroFarms. You're seeking to revolutionize agriculture through advanced vertical farms and your innovative technology platform. What you're doing is so cool. You've been named as Circular Economy 100 company, listed on Fast Company's global list of most innovative companies, Time Magazine's best inventions, and are a recipient of the Ethical Corporation's 2020 Responsible Award in Sustainable Innovation. What is so cool about what you're doing? Tell us.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be with everyone here. So I would say our biggest contribution to the agriculture space is unlocking this Pandora's box of what makes a plant grow. So here, my last company was a nanotech company. I'm not from the ag space. I'm a kid from the Bronx. But I'm amazed how little we know about plants. And it's not surprising when you sort of peel it back and you look at what the world has as its tools, it's mostly in the field. And from a scientific standpoint, it's very hard to perform scientific experimentation in the field when there are too many uncontrolled variables. So the process of scientific discovery is isolate a variable, test an assumption. And you can't isolate temperature, humidity, clouds, all of those things. In fully controlled agriculture, that's what we can do. So we built the AeroFarms as a platform. And as a platform, we innovate on the mechanical side, the biological, the genetic, the operational, the environmental, and it's the data science that pulls it all together. We've grown about 600 different varieties of plants, and you could look at our plumbing system, our electrical system, our airflow system, all of those, and we're probably on 5th and 6th generation. So it's hard, farming's tough, but each time we test, it's how to grow a plant better, and better being quality. So we start off with quality, taste, texture, nutritional density. It's not about calories, it's about protein. And how do we then improve cost of goods sold? So how do we get yield, which is correlated to cost of goods sold? And then how do we get volumes? And on our platform, we partner with ag tech companies like Cargill, BASF, big companies, small companies like Benson Hill, that's a leader in genetics, other genetics companies. In fact, illustrating the first CRISPR-Cas9 product in the world, so the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2020 went to the developers of CRISPR-Cas9, but that was developed on our platform. And then we're partnering on the mechanical side, Nokia Bell Labs, we put together an imaging system, and sometimes we roll up our sleeves and innovate ourselves. You talked about nutrients, so here, like there are a couple big players in fertigation systems that deliver nutrients. Here, the way and this illustrates the complexity and the opportunity of vertical farming, the way we deliver nutrients is different from field farmers, different from greenhouse or typical farmers, where most farmers, you put in a seed, you put in fertilizer, and then you re-water. Sometimes you make adjustments. Here, we developed our own fertigator that makes adjustments, and we break up our nutrients into 18 different minerals and elements, 8 different buckets, and it could replenish systems with a sensory loop of understanding magnesium, zinc, iron, what's being depleted, and how do we give it back? And how does that influence taste, texture, nutritional density? I had a test last week that came in where we increased antioxidants, antioxidants, by 300% versus the control. So we're also an operator. Take all that aside, because it's operating gets you the data. And here, partnering with Dell Technologies and Nokia Bell Labs to get the imaging and the data analytics allows us to understand and provide the data analytics to understand how to grow plants better, but you need the sensory system and the sensory loop. So we're very vertically integrated from the MES, the user interface, the SCADA, the PLC, all those controls with the sensory system. So then when we operate, we're getting data. And here we're building in the UAE a big facility focused on an R&D facility, and we want to come to the MENA region because it aligns with the value proposition where there's not a lot of arable land, there's not a lot of water. If we can go a plant with 95% less water, that's of interest, but also working with other partners to solve real problems. I'll give one other example of another problem, and this is hops. So AB InBev, Anheuser-Busch came to us where they had a problem growing a specialty hop, as there's growing trends in beers that people want unique specialty beers. And within 18 months, we figured out how to grow this hop to a commercial scale where it goes into a brand called Goose Island Beers. And that's one that's public, but there are about a dozen of these examples where big CPG companies and other ag companies are coming to innovate on our platform so we could solve real problems in the agriculture supply chain, as well as with our understanding of plant science, figure out how to grow plants that's relevant for us and sometimes relevant for greenhouses, relevant for field farmers, so we could hopefully do our part to continue innovating, move standards of performance better, and deliver better products, ultimately doing more with less for the space.
Yeah. Thank you. Prince Khaled, investment is the fuel for this revolution. And what we're hearing is we have another coming train wreck in food supply. We have innovations happening that are re-engineering the food system, including your investments in protein and more accessible and less demanding ways of raising protein. How can we increase the investment to take these ideas to scale quicker? Because every day, every 10 seconds, we're losing a child to hunger in the world.
That's how. So pandemics play a good part in it. I mean, we've seen the issue with food security here in the region. 80% of the food in the region is imported, or 90% rather, is imported. That's a huge problem, especially when there's a next pandemic because of the way we're treating this planet. Things need to move faster. But just to give you a small example, so the fermentation industry, the cellular agriculture industry, and the plant-based protein industry is roughly $3.5–4 billion industry as of end of 2020. That's only going to grow substantially, especially for the cellular agriculture industry. Again, we've seen the numbers explode for demand for meat. But the issue is the quality of meat, and the bigger issue is where do you source that meat from? I feel humbled by being with such amazing panelists like this because as a vegan, whatever they're doing is the star of the plate. Unfortunately, what people understand the star of the plate is the piece of protein. Now, granted, lentils can be the star of the plate, but the issue is the interpretation of what's on your plate and why does that piece of meat, why is it so essential for people right now? And if we look back not too long ago, 60, 70, 80 years ago, this was a luxury item. Now it's just commoditized in a way that we're just destroying this planet. And money is going to flow into this because there is a real problem in this industry. We can't accelerate it, unfortunately, but from what I'm seeing in Singapore, for example, for them allowing Just to serve its chicken over there, albeit but with the special privileges and whatnot, is just a huge eye-opener for me that countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like the UAE need to follow suit. I mean, we've seen Qatar also do a deal with Just. Now, granted, they're not as advanced as other companies that at least we're investors in, but at least it's a beginning. And we're just really excited to hopefully see some of the bigger companies like Upside Foods, Turtle Tree, Blunello, who does fish, aquaculture, to put it on people's plates. The thing is, we have a problem, and the money is flowing into the problem. Now, is that fast enough? Maybe not. But at the end of the day, I think the market will correct itself in a way that the money will flow fast enough. The medium that we use to produce these proteins will go low enough so that we'll have price parity with the heavily subsidized meat industry.
So we know that there's some problems where you get to a point where money isn't the solution. And in part, this transformation of food and the way we look at food, part of it's consumer demand and consumer education. You were pointing to that, I think, with people's expectations of the sources of protein and how they get those, and a lack of understanding that there's diverse ways to get that. How much of this is about consumer preferences and needing to address that?
Consumer preference for me doesn't play the big enough role as much as these companies adopting this technology sooner. As soon as you see Cargill, JBL, as soon as you see Tyson Foods and then the bigger conglomerates adopt these technologies, it'll become mainstream whether people like it or not, because that's the more efficient way to produce protein. So naturally, that will just take its toll and then go into the market.
Could I add to that for a moment? So one thing that's COVID, never let a good pandemic go to waste, or a bad pandemic go to waste. So one of the items that we see happening with COVID is the consumer starting to ask how, not just what. So not only what the food is, but how is it grown? And there's an opportunity here where to tell that story of what goes into our food and what could go differently. And I'll give two examples. Like we sell to Walmart and we sell to Whole Foods, kind of different spectrums of the range. And here, in both cases, we've had conversations about private label. And recently they said, no, we can't tell your story as well as you can, because you'll tell the how more, and that's more and more what the customer wants. So there's an opportunity to explain what it takes from a resource standpoint to have a fish or beef or something there, and what are the alternatives, or leafy greens, like the fact that we use 95% less water sometimes to grow a plant. The other piece to share about the policy side, we have this notion, sometimes what I see governments make mistakes, and in the US we see it, this notion that water should be free as an example. And when we subsidize water, subsidize pieces, it takes away the incentive for the entrepreneur and the innovator to solve a problem. So sometimes market forces going in a direction could be another catalyst for innovation to solve problems. So there's another opportunity, and that also illustrates why the importance of public-private partnerships to work together.
That's such an important point.
Yeah, I would like to ask you all, what if government could do one thing to change the game, what comes to mind?
In my view, it's their support of scale, which comes in many ways. That can be support in capital. For example, export credit agencies supporting the capital investment into these industries. It can be support in trade policy and economic interventions, right? You've seen even in Saudi where they've raised import tariffs. I'm not a huge believer long-term in protectionism, but short-term to help an industry get off its feet and get to scale to be economic. Transitional subsidies can make a lot of sense if they're well thought out and well executed. And then the final thing I want to mention on it is, of course, support of entrepreneurship, of creating ecosystems and environments that support the ability to build companies to tackle these problems and scale them. But scale is the issue. And I wanted to actually tackle the last thing. I think we as alternative proteins and farming methods need to take responsibility for one thing I think we're not talking enough about. This is a conference on humanity, but we can't talk about why our solutions make this ultra premium, excellent product for a subset of the demographic and a subset of crops they could possibly eat on a plate to be the star of the plate, right? We need to talk about how do we democratize access to food production in these new methods. And so cost is never talked about. Affordability of food is never talked about. Why? Of course, let's all admit, all of us raise private capital, and we have to be careful that nobody reads through to attack your margins. But the fundamental thing is we need to get to scale and drive cost out of these solutions.
Yes.
I think the biggest barrier to, I've tried alternative meats, they're actually really good. And I asked my parents this weekend in preparation for this conference, I said, I wanted to get your view as consumers in Arizona. My parents are rifle-toting, hunting Americans, right? And I said, how do we get you to eat that? They're like, we do love these things. We just buy them when they're on sale. They're too expensive. They're luxury.
They are.
That's the problem. People will buy these things. They're great products. Our products, they need to be affordable and available. They need to be, people want to do the right thing and choose the more sustainable alternative, but don't make it hurt to do so.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you how to do that. You wanted to jump in?
I think that it's fantastic that we have various approaches around the, I mean, the table, there's no table in the middle here, but because it's not like either this or this or this. It's and a lot more. We need to do everything we can. Because let's put some figures around on the table. Again, it's not in the middle there. But if really we're going to have 1 billion people more, on an average, a person eats or needs, on average, 60 kilograms of wheat per year. That's 60 million tons, huh? Only of the wheat. We didn't talk about the corn. 60 million tons. That's a lot of hectares. Huh? If you're the best of the best and you do 6 tons, that's 10 million hectares. And that's only about that and the corn. And that's why I think all the elements are important. First, the whole movement of going to plant-based proteins is fantastic, because it helps that. Because I have not even talked about the fact that part of the wheat and the barley actually goes to the animals, which are transforming them to wheat. Because the 60 million will actually go to 100 million, 150 million. There's no 150 million hectares available, or even 100 million hectares available. You're going to have to cut all the woods in Africa. I think that we need to go through all these directions. Plant-based proteins is fantastic. Insects also. I mean, I have built a supercritical facility. We're participating in the research for that. We actually have achieved fantastic results for defattening basically the insects which are killed. We achieve defattening rates of 93 to 97%. We will patent that. But there is a lot more to do. As far as, obviously, there will be more land needed, because yes, I can increase the productivity, or I can help to increase the productivity in the lands where I'm active. But one thing which is very important is to do, and that's really what the governments have to do, is to do proper land reform. It sounds crazy that I have to say this in a discussion about food, but a farmer will not invest properly in his lands if he doesn't know that next year or the year after or 5 years from now he's still there. He will not. You know very well, nutrition, nitrates is like a shot in the veins. It goes immediately. But phosphates and potassium, it takes 3, 4, 5 years. You need to do pH controls, you need to do soil analysis and so on. And
Okay, so land reform, what would you like to see governments doing more of?
I mean, I echo what my co-panelists are saying. I can't really add to that anymore. I think that just the governments need to open up their minds a little more to supporting these new technologies, because these new technologies are saving these governments overpaying and printing money for problems that we already have a solution for. The mentality of we can only save our planet if it's only economically feasible it's mind-boggling for me. I do not understand this mentality. And these panelists have just hit it on the nail right on the head.
Yeah, you know, if you read the history of nations, I mean, nations organized primarily, you know, for self-defense, but also for food reasons, and to be able to ensure food for populations. There's nothing more fundamental to the mission of a government than making sure people can eat. And yet we've seen that fall apart. And as in 2008, whole nations couldn't feed their people.
So I'd say, like, land reform, things are simple. Just keep, like, ways of measuring it simple. Like, you can't leave the land worse than when you started.
Yeah.
2 things that are simple. Just measure the quality of the water, measure the quality of the land. Put standards in, performance-based standards. It's not about being prescriptive. Don't say it needs to be vertical farming or greenhouse farming or field. Just say these are the standards.
Yeah.
Water, land, air, things of that nature. Measure it and make sure people need to adhere to it. Getting back to your earlier point of what else to do, one of the financing gaps, and I agree with what was said about financing, more specifically, one of the financing gaps is debt, senior debt, true senior debt for capital-intensive programs. As an example, like, we're growing strawberries, and we've been growing strawberries for 3 years. We have excellent strawberries. So now when we go from something the size of this room to something the size of the building, that's capital intensive. It's very hard, even though we've been in business, it's a new crop, and then you need history. Debt wants history. This is another place where it's a great area for public-private partnerships to come together. So there are tremendous opportunities. Commerce, I think, needs to do what it can to lead its way. Innovative investors help it along, but we all need to move fast in, I agree, multiple directions to speed it up.
So, we've seen through history that there's a drought and people starve. There's a floods and people starve. You're talking about delinking food from climate. Can we imagine a day where dry lands does not mean lack of food supply, where two wetlands mean no food supply?
Absolutely. I mean, let me speak for when COVID struck. I live in the United Arab Emirates, and they formed a national committee on the adoption of agriculture technology for food security. Very long name. But what it was to tackle was to be open-minded from a policy standpoint of how to solve this problem at scale, because COVID obviously hit that country particularly hard with tremendous import dependence. And one of the things, it's a portfolio solution. It's as Prince Khaled said, it's all of these solutions. But they have different solutions. So one of the things I was asked is, what can you produce in one of your high-tech hybrid systems? And I said, I can produce anything. The question is, what should I produce? And then what should I produce in terms of trade-offs of water, capital, and what else? What are the alternatives? So for example, grains. Grains can be ground, stored, and siloed, shipped in a giant container the size of this room or bigger. And as a result, the cost of the grain, or of the shipping as the total arrived value of the good is very low. But a strawberry that we both grow, but we grow locally, cannot. It perishes in a very short time. It's very high cost of transportation, blah, 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 right? You get the economic picture. So something that's water intensive and perishes under 14 days probably should be produced locally at massive scale with great efficiency in a production system that serves each geography of the world. Grains probably shouldn't. Tremendous water intensity, can be ground, stored, and siloed. It should be produced in places that are abundant in water and land in great efficiency, and then transported efficiently and strategically stored in bilateral and trilateral and multilateral partnerships with governments to secure food, right? So it's a big answer, but I wanted to tackle that. It was said earlier, the solutions exist today. They do, but it requires cooperation, it requires capital and support, and then, of course, adoption and scaling of these solutions that fundamentally solve the problem better. We use very little water. We integrate now with renewable energy. We have a 30-megawatt solar power farm powering our farms here in Saudi, and now we're partnering with a geothermal power plant in the Philippines. So you can marry infrastructure to reduce your cost. It's good for the world, and it's good for your cost structure.
Prince Khaled, each of our entrepreneurs here is investing their lives right now in a very particular solution.
Sure.
You get to see the big picture. What are some of the areas that you think need more investment, or that you're looking at as, exciting new areas to invest in?
I mean, farming, vertical farming, AeroFarming, and then the likes of what my esteemed panelists are running are definitely one of the most important things. For me personally, I personally believe that cultivated meat is just the future of the meat industry, and I'll just keep echoing that all day. Again, I'm repeating myself over and over again, but so the vast inefficiencies of that industry just merit more and more investment in this industry. The sad reality is you can have an abundance of everything that my co-panelists are producing, and as soon as there's a shortage of some sort of meat, all hell breaks loose. And it's mind-boggling again for me. But at the end of the day, that's consumer education. So for me, I definitely see the merit of whatever their businesses are running. And me personally, I'd definitely be a partner with all of them because at the end of the day, we're running out of farmland. We're running out of places to farm because of the vast, because of how big the animal agriculture industry is and its destruction to our planet is. So that's really what I have to say.
So if the world has to double the amount of food we produce by, I think, 2060, if population growth equals what we think, are we going to get there?
We can double the amount of food. That's not a problem. Again, we have enough food to feed close to 70 billion animals a day. We have enough food to feed people. As far as I know, we're 8 billion, 7.5 billion people. We have enough food to feed people. It's just that how do you grow the food and where do you allocate those resources?
And I would like to, sorry.
Yes.
I would like to add that for me, and sorry to be blunt, it's an aberration that 40% of the corn from farmland is being turned into bioethanol. That's a huge reserve of potential food for people. So in America, 40% of the corn is going into bioethanol. And so it's an aberration. I think technologies are being developed that you can use, so that you can use bio-waste, straw and other things, to turn that into bioethanol, but leave the food to the people. And so I think there is reserve, maybe not to double the food, but yes, if we reduce the amount of animals who need to eat, and so we go to animal proteins and insect proteins, and we start using all the farmland for actually making food for the people, I think we're fine. I think we're fine. The problem, though, is that besides the whammy that we have now, energy, is that last week, the European Parliament has decided on the policy from farm to fork, which basically means three things. One, pesticides 50% down, fertilizers 20% down, and 25% bio. Now there's a study coming out, which existed before that, but people were hiding it, that if you do all that the food in Europe will go down by 30%. I think it's a pretty egoistic way of saying, in Europe, we're fine, we have enough food. Europe is not going to die from food. And so now we're going to be very, very good, and we're going to do all these things, and never mind the 25 million tons which are expected to be coming out of Europe, going to 11 million tons to Egypt and 7 million tons to Algeria, and what is going to happen there?
Philippe, you sound upset, like policies are going in the opposite direction.
Exactly.
They're making it harder. Is it because governments don't understand the problem?
Because they didn't think all the way through. I do agree that there's a lot to do regarding fertilizer. I think regarding fertilizer, the problem has to be split in two areas. Fertilizer use in Bulgaria, Romania, and Ukraine, especially Bulgaria and Romania, it's 50% of what is being used in Western Europe. So
you think it has to go up? Did you want to jump in?
I do think governments don't understand often the problem. I mean, policy gets in the way, and it's not that hard. It's back to standards of performance. I mean, if let's say over-fertilizing leads to river runoff, algae blooms, things of that nature, then if one taxes fertilizer, farmers will be better users of fertilizer. If pesticides, herbicides, fungicides contaminate our soils or something of that nature, tax pesticides. So there are ways, what the construct is hard at is how do we find ways where the externalities get factored into commerce. So the public-private partnerships, and I think government is, in general, pretty poor at this, at least in the United States, is find those externalities, figure out a way, carbon's the best example, figure out a way to put a number figure on it, and then commerce figures it out. And we need a holistic solution. Part of it is behavioral change, get people to eat more insects or more like fermentation proteins or something of that nature. And then the other holistic element is sometimes we need to understand what to be farmed where. Sometimes the solution's field farming, sometimes it's greenhouse farming, sometimes it's vertical farming.
I'm going to have to stop you there. We have a minute and a half left. I'm going to do a quick poll of the panelists. Okay. Anyone who wants to vote with them. Okay, 10 years from now, is the percentage of meat, what percentage of meat is plant-based versus lab, the way we source it now versus lab or plant-based?
Repeat the question, sorry.
What percentage of meat in the world is going to be lab or plant-based?
Is going to be, or what is it now?
10 years from now.
10 years from now.
10 years from now. I mean, I can easily see it being easily 50%. 10 years? Easy.
Who agrees, 50%? Plant-based meats, okay. You
Well, not plant-based, cultivated meat.
Cultivated meat, yeah. How about the urgently hungry? The number in the world, is it going to be up or down? Who says up?
I was going to up.
You said 10 years, right?
10 years.
I think it'll be up.
Up, sure.
Okay, so not a lot of confidence we're going in the right direction. How about the number of big farms? We heard a little bit of the fight between big farming and small farming here, and what's the future. you think the percentage of big farming per land available is going to be up or down? It's going to be up?
Up for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, versus small farms. Okay, and last word from each of you, Prince Khaled, on what your message would be to the world on food.
Governments need to adopt innovation. Government really, I mean, not all governments see the problem. Every single government sees the problem, whether it's the EU, whether it's the US, whether it's the Middle East, everybody sees the problem. It's just that how they're acting onto this problem is the biggest concern. So for me, for example, here, look at us. We're talking about the problem here by an organization that's being operated by the government. So clearly there is a problem, and they do see the problem. Now, we're lucky here in the Middle East, and Middle East in general, that we're not swayed by lobbying, we're not swayed by fundraising for an elected official and how he sways his decisions. So they clearly see the problem, and they're adopting amazing companies like this to implement solutions to this. So this is my only message is adopt innovation. Innovation will solve the issue.
Very quickly, it's a supply and a demand problem. We're only talking about supply now, but policy has a role in helping to solve both. So I think we need to look at the calorie pyramid now versus 50 years from now. What is it versus what it should be, and then how do we make it what it should be so that we can feed all these people and make these palatable problems that technologies can solve?
Changing the pyramid. 15 seconds, David?
So the MENA region is an incredibly exciting place to be an entrepreneur. When one looks to innovate and lead, you look at where there's high political will and high pain. And here there's a boldness where let's do it first, let's be bigger, let's take on hard challenges. So there's high political will. And in agriculture, there's high pain because there's not that much arable land, not that much soil. So companies like AeroFarms, we're doubling down in the region, and there's a great opportunity to collaborate and move innovation higher.
Thank you. Philippe?
As a joke, I hope that the guys who are doing the metaverse are making it so complex that we can actually go into the metaverse and have a real food, and it's going to be available for everybody. I mean, as a joke, but I think there are optimistic points on the long run. In the long run, there's a real problem, and we have to put figures on it, because people say there's a food crisis, but nobody says it's a food crisis of 100 million tons. This means how many hectares and how are we going to get there? What are we going to do? And yes, there are things that has to be changed and done differently. We can have a long debate afterwards about fertilizer, because fertilizer is so expensive that nobody actually wants to throw it out if it's not necessary. But actually, the over-fertilization is linked to too many animals.
Thank you.
Let's do it. Let's do it. There's a problem.
So it sounds like we need vision, we need leadership, we need finance, and we need a plan. And if we do that, I think we'll be able to move humanity forward. Join me in thanking our panelists.